What if the universe isn't mostly made of things? In the Theogony, Hesiod tells us how the world is born. Not from light, not from order, from darkness. First we have chaos, the abyss, the absence of all form, and from chaos we have Erebus, which is the darkness of the deep, and Nyx, the night. And then from Nyx and Erebus, from this union of the darkest forces, two children are born simultaneously. The first one is Imera, the day, the light that will come, the revelation. And the second is Aether, the invisible field that holds everything together. Siblings, born together from darkness, and yet entirely different. One is visible and one is not. One is the light and one is the medium through which light travels. This series ends with the sister, but this episode is about the brother. And here's what is strange. Most people have never heard of the brother. We know earth, water, fire, air, but the fifth element, the one that the Greeks considered the highest, the most perfect, the most fundamental, has been totally forgotten, which raises a question worth sitting with before we go further. How do you lose the most important thing? What if, beneath all matter, all the particles, all the solid and visible, there is something else? Something that does not burn, that does not flow, that does not scatter or decay. Something that has no weight but holds everything together. Modern physics has been quietly rediscovering this problem for over a century now. We call it dark energy, quantum fields, the vacuum that isn't empty, the space between things that turns out to be doing most of the work. The invisible that holds everything together. Imagine you have mapped the whole world. You have Earth, the solidity, the foundation, the material weight. You have water, you have flow, adaptation, diffusion. You have air, movement, breath, and transmission. You have fire, which is energy and transformation. It is the flame that changes forms. And yet, however complete this four-part system seems to be, something remains unsatisfied here. As if you have described everything that decays, but not the medium in which decay happens. As if you have accounted for everything that moves, but not the field that allows movement to be movement. There is something that doesn't burn like fire, that does not flow like water, that does not scatter like air, that does not weight as earth, as material, something that does not corrode, does not rot, and does not decompose. It is something that surrounds the stars and also the finest synapses of our own thoughts. We're not talking about simply the sky, not simply air, but the fifth body, the quinta essentia, the most subtle, the most pure, and the most incorruptible form of element. Ether is not one thing among the others. Ether is the thinnest, the most subtle dimension of the cosmos. It is what the Greeks needed to explain why the heavens don't obey in the same way as earthly things. Why the stars are not born and do not die the way bodies on earth do. Why the circular motion of the celestial bodies seem to belong to a higher order of being. Ether is not simply the fifth element of the world. It is the element that invites you to rethink what matter is, what consciousness is, what motion is, and ultimately what presence means. What the word actually means. In Greek, words are not labels, they are deposits of thought, deposits of memory, fossils of meaning. Ethir, παρά το αήθην κυκλοφορικός. Ether, from what is always running unstoppably in a full circle. Ai means always, continuously, without pause, not simply for a long time, uninterruptedly, eternally. Theo means I run, I move with force, I flow at speed. We are not talking about stillness, we are talking about constant active motion. Etho, I burn, I flame, I illuminate. Not a sudden explosion, it is a state of luminous, sustained manifestation. So, ether etymologically is eternal circular motion combined with luminous finesse, so to speak. It is not the fire that consumes, it is the fire that persists. It is not the motion of distraction, it is the motion of cosmic stability. It is not the explosion that destroys form, it is the unceasing circulation that holds form in order. This is why ether was associated with the highest, the purest layer of the cosmos, with whatever doesn't get contaminated by the randomness and decay of the terrestrial sphere, with whatever rotates always in circle without any deviation.
Aristotle writes, "It seems that this name, ether, has been handed down from the ancients to the present time, they having the same conception of it as we ourselves. For we must believe that the same opinions arrive to us not once or twice, but infinitely often. Therefore, as the first body is something different from earth, fire, air, and water, they gave the name ether to the highest place, deriving its names from the fact that it always runs, thin ai, throughout eternal time. Anaxagoras, however, misuses the term, using ether as a synonym for fire. Did you catch that? Aristotle, a man we call ancient, is referring to his own ancients and to a tradition that was already lost in the mists of time even for him. And look at the word he uses, apirakis, infinitely often. He is telling us that these truths, these revelations about the cosmos, do not reach humanity once or twice. They arrive infinitely often. We discover the first body, we align ourselves with the always running force of the universe, and then we fall back into the night, only to rediscover it in the next cycle. Everything we think that is new today, our science, our progress, Aristotle is looking at us whispering, hey, it has all happened before, infinitely often.
We can say metaphorically, as a philosophical image, that ether is the operating system of the universe that is running non-stop in the background. Just as a way to understand what? To understand that for the Greeks, the cosmos was never empty. Everything was permeated by order, by force, by motion, and possibility. But here's what I find strange about ether. If ether is this subtle, invisible, incorruptible field, then what does it have to do with us? What does it have to do with our consciousness, with the way we perceive the world? And Plato had an answer, and to give it, he didn't use myth, he used geometry. The geometry of being, the 5 shapes of the cosmos. In the Timaeus, Plato is giving us the geometry of existence. Plato tells us that the world is not just made of matter. It is made of proportion, of measure, of relation, of number, of form. The order of the cosmos is at the same time sensory and mathematical. And before the solid we see around us, we have the point, the line, the plane, and then the solid. And before form, we have the intelligible principle that allows form to be form. Plato builds the elements on regular solids, not to do physics, but to show that reality is not random, that the universe is permeated by logical structure. And what's the great secret here? These solids are not only cosmological, they can also be read as symbolic forms of consciousness. Plato does not say this directly, but he points there. At least that's how I read it.
The etymological bomb, schema and echin. The word schema, which means shape, carries within it the root of the verb echin, which means to have, to hold. And if you follow this thought to its end, a shape is not just an external outline, it is a habit, an exis, an internal state that has gained stability and permanence. For something to have a form, it must exist in a specific relation, a schesis with itself and its surroundings. It is the geometry of belonging. Shape is the way essence occupies its place. It is not something imposed from the outside, but the internal drive of being that finally finds its boundary, its limit. In Greek thought, the boundless is chaotic and unintelligible. The schema is the holding, it is the moment the spirit has itself, transforming the formless into a visible structured cosmos. In Greek, the opposite of the beautiful is not just an aesthetic failure, it is the aschimon. If schema is the having, the stance of an essence that has succeeded in finding its limit, then the aschimon is that which lacks shape. It is the privative A acting upon the very possibility of being to stand upright. The ugly is the amorphous. It is matter or consciousness that has not yet been held together by the logos. It is the soul that remains fluid and melting. It lacks internal discipline because it cannot yet have itself. So for Plato, vice is a form of ugliness. It is not the presence of a dark force, but an absence of geometry. A soul that hasn't managed to compose its internal triangles into a solid. That soul remains ugly, not because it is evil in the modern moralistic sense, but because it is incomplete. It is a work in progress that hasn't found its center. And then we have the word cosmos, which etymologically means both the universe and the ornament. Plato's ethics is a movement toward beauty through order. When the soul conquers its schema, when it finally holds its powers, which is reason, spirit, and appetite, in the right proportion, it ceases to be aschimon. It becomes a jewel of existence. So, geometry here is not on paper, it is the backbone of a consciousness that decides to move in order in the middle of chaos.
The soul's three-part structure, the foundational triangle. Every person is a triangle. How? The soul, Plato tells us, is structured in three distinct but interconnected powers. We have the rational, which is nous, the apex of the triangle. Nous is the power that seeks truth and the idea. When we say nous, we are not talking about the brain and we are not talking about the everyday mind. Think about it like higher consciousness. The spirited part, which is the Thymoiedes, and this is one corner of the base, where we have the drive, the courage. It is the emotional part of us. It is the capacity to impose order. And we have the third one, the appetitive part, the Epithetikon, which is the other corner of the base. And this is the connection to matter, to pleasure, to things we need, to things we want. The Platonic solids are nothing other than combinations of these triangles. If the individual doesn't compose the triangles of the soul, the solid of their consciousness collapses. Synthesis happens through what? Synthesis happens through justice, which for Plato is not a legal term, it is a geometrical term. Each part of the soul doing its own work in the right proportion. What binds the soul's triangles into a solid is Eros. In this dimension, Eros is the very driving force that pushes the partial, the unshaped yet triangle, toward the whole, towards the solid and the sphere. Without Eros for truth, the soul's triangles remain scattered. The five solids as frequencies of existence. We have the Tetrahedron. This is fire. This is sharpness and motion. This is focused will. It is the very spark of thought that cuts through ignorance. We have the cube. Earth, materiality, stability and form. This is bodily consciousness, the very foundation of experience, the soul's anchoring in the world of the senses, our world here, the sensory world. The octahedron, this is air. Air symbolizes subtle motion, mental communication, the very vehicle of ideas between fire and water. The icosahedron, this is water. We have flow and variability, emotional consciousness, the ability to adapt and encompass. Dodecahedron, this is ether, this is the cosmos, this is the quintessence, this is holistic divine consciousness. Plato writes that the very universe is a dodecahedron. It is the very shape that contains all the other shapes. The solids don't exist in isolation. The unity comes through proportion. The mathematical relationship that makes unlike things one. All five are perfectly inscribed into a sphere, which is the one, the indivisible unity. The golden ratio, the phi number, is the connective tissue that allows consciousness to move from one level to another without losing its unity. And here's something worth pausing on. Every one of these solids has an elevating dimension and a shadow. It has a way that it liberates and a way it imprisons. And this, of course, is not a minor point, because most of the systems of thought we live inside, be it political, social, intellectual, are people who have confused one solid for the entire cosmos. Let me show you what I mean. The five solids, the geometry of the prison and of liberation. 1. The cube, earth, materiality, foundation and rigidity. The cube is extremely essential. Without the cube, there's no foundation, there's no body, there's no home, no law, no endurance, no gravity, no continuity. The mind of the cube is the mind that can withstand, a mind that can build from nothing, that it can hold its position when everything around it trembles and collapses. But this same stability, when it is cut off from the higher elements, becomes rigidity. This is how we get dogma, petrification. This is how we end up having a mind that does not see and only holds. And then the cube becomes what we call fanaticism, identification with a role, obsession with some interpretation, and a hardness that calls itself the truth. The cube is what creates dogmas. Dogmas has walls, has 6 faces that are absolutely closed and impenetrable. It is a squared truth that admits no questioning and believes that gravity, it is the weight that keeps the soul locked to matter. And what do we have here? Fragmentation. While the dodecahedron unites, The cube is what separates and it is generating fear and the need for dominance. Funnily enough, kivos is the shape of the dice. Yeah? It is what is falling and then you have to follow its moves. That's it. So Earth, materiality, is a sacred foundation, but it becomes a trap when the foundation pretends to be the very horizon. 2. The Icosahedron, water, flow, and diffusion. Water is what? Water is sentiment. Water is empathy. It is the capacity for relationship. It is the living psychic circulation. It is what learns, what adapts, what permeates, and what contains. But when water loses its center, flow becomes diffusion. Emotion becomes manipulable. And this is when sensitivity becomes a mass, a crowd, a mob. Then we have a mind that says, if it's many of us feeling this way, then it must be true. But truth is not measured by the intensity of your feelings. Water, again, it is sacred as the very possibility of connection. It becomes a trap when flow stops serving substance. 3. The Octahedron, air, reason, and detachment. Air is what gives us discernment. It is logical processing. It is the multiple perspectives that we can have, the ability to see both sides of the story without collapsing. This is the hermetic mind, the hermetic mind that bridges, that it does not fragment. But when reason is cut off from purpose and virtue, then it becomes cold mechanism. This is when we get technocracy, ideologies, debate with no truth, analysis that changes nothing because it fears being transformed into lived experience. And then again, here we have what? We have air, which is a very sacred thing as a bridge, but it becomes a trap when the bridge forgets it was just built to be crossed. 4. The Tetrahedron, fire, will, and explosion. Fire is the very definition of creativity. We say it, I am on fire, right? We have will, passion, transformation. It is the sacred frenzy of Eros. Without fire, there's no breakthrough, no birth of a new world. But when fire stops illuminating and only wants to dominate, this is when fire becomes what? Becomes arrogance, becomes violence, becomes destructive ideology, becomes a horrible bloody revolution that worships blood more than truth. Fire, again, is a very sacred thing as transformation. It becomes a trap when it forgets that the reason to burn is to purify and not to rule. 5. The Dodecahedron, Aether, unity and clarity. And now we arrive at the very top, the Dodecahedron. We have 12 pentagonal faces. This is the most mysterious and the most cosmic form. Here, we don't have simply another element. We have the very coherence of opposites. Ether is not ideology. It is not a political system. It is not an identity, not a party, not yet another system. All of those belong to the solids, belongs to the boxes of the solids. Ether is a state of consciousness. It is the moment when the mind stops being fragmented and begins to grasp the common thread that connects everything. It is the common logos of Heraclitus. It doesn't abolish earth, water, air, and fire. It contains everything and it harmonizes them and it permeates them. And this is why its only real shadow is not an opposing element, it is the illusion that you have reached it while you are still looking through the eyes of a lower solid. And this is where we have spiritual narcissism. It is the confusion between talking about unity and actually living unity. The dodecahedron cannot become ego. The moment it becomes ego, it is already lost. Now look around you. Modern humans live inside systems that almost always make the same mistake. They take a partial principle of reality and baptize it absolute. Every ism that claims to be the final truth is exactly this. It is a partial solid that thinks it is the entire cosmos. And this is why Plato writes The Cave. This is why true education is not information, it is the very turning of the soul. Ουδείς αγεωμέτρητος εισίτω. Let no one enter who does not know geometry. This inscription was written above Plato's academy. And of course, it referred not only to mathematics, but to the very capacity for structured consciousness. Now, the Pythagoreans understood this geometrically, and they actually encoded it in a symbol that today terrifies a lot of people. But this symbol actually represents total health. Phi, pentagon, pentagram, υγεία, the very signature of living harmony. The dodecahedron has pentagonal faces, and inside the pentagon we have one of the deepest secrets of beauty and mathematical proportion, the golden ratio, the phi number. Phi is not simply a number. Phi is proportion. It is the way form maintains balance without ever becoming static. And we see it everywhere in nature. We see it in the arrangement of seeds, in spirals, in the branches of trees, absolutely everywhere. For the Greeks, phi had to do with beauty. It was not just a decoration, it was a sign of what? A sign of inner order. The circle of fifths and number 12. In the circle of fifths in music, we have 12 notes that rotate to close a perfect cycle. If we take those 12 notes and we compare them to the 12 faces of the dodecahedron, we kind of transform the cosmos from a geometrical shape into a living musical instrument. The circle of fifths is based on what we call in music the perfect fifth. The dodecahedron is the only solid that is born from the golden ratio. Now, there is a deep mathematical connection between the Pythagorean fifth of the scale of the circle of the fifths and the proportion that builds the pentagon. If the dodecahedron ether contains all the other solids, then the musical dodecahedron contains all the frequencies of all the elements. Yeah, you want to say hi? You okay? I'm shooting a video here. So, think of consciousness not just as an observer. Think of your consciousness as a string that is stretched between earth and heaven. And this is why music can heal, because it restores the geometry of the soul to its correct Platonic position. The Pythagoreans used the pentagram as their seal, it was their signature. And it symbolized the Greek word health, υγεία. For the Pythagoreans, the word υγεία, health, did not just simply mean not being sick. It meant the harmony of the elements, the correct relation of the very levels of existence. And each letter mapped to one of the 5 solids. We have Ypsilon, Ether, water, Icosahedron, Gamma, yeah, earth and cube, Iota, idea, form and quality, Dodecahedron, E, epsilon and iota, which means sacred fire, it is the warmth of the sun, the Tetrahedron, alpha, air, air, the octahedron. So the meaning of the word here becomes powerful. We have υγεία, health, and υγεία is the very harmonization of what? Of body, of emotion, of reason, of will, and of higher light. So the healthy person is not simply someone who is functional. They are the person in whom the levels of existence are not tearing each other apart anymore. They are in full unity. And here's the funny thing, that this symbol that once expressed wholeness, measure, harmony, and health was later demonized and inverted. One thing that I want to do with this channel is to bring back the archetypes. We need to understand our archetypes as humanity, once again. Haralambos Spiridis, a bridge to modern interpretation. I need to introduce you to a man who devoted his life to proving this harmony mathematically. Haralambos Spiridis is a professor of musical acoustics at the University of Athens, the musical department and the philosophical department of the University of Athens. In reality, he is a modern Pythagorean. Spiridis did something remarkable. He took Platonic cosmology and ran it through the equations of modern physics. And in his study of Plato's theory of everything, he demonstrates what? He demonstrates that the Platonic solids and υγεία, the pentagram, are not simply shapes. They are the fundamental frequencies of the universe. He basically shows that ether is the field where the vibrations of music, of the motion in order and harmony, crystallize into geometrical form. Physics, if it goes deep enough, will inevitably meet music. And music, if it goes high enough, it will inevitably meet the geometrical divine construction of the universe. So in his study, the word υγεία is not just a wish, be healthy. It is a mathematical key. It is the pentagram, which is the basis of the Dodecahedron. Ether is not a void. It is the 5th essence that animates the universe. And it is connecting what? It is connecting our material world to higher states of consciousness. Haralambos Spiridis, Plato's theory of everything and the Spiridian unified theory of electro-interaction, Department of Music Studies and Department of Philosophy, National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. I will have the link to his presentation in the description. Of course, it is in Greek, so you will need to throw it in you will need to translate it, but if you are interested, you can have an attempt. You can have a go. I understood half of it because I am a musician, but I'm not a mathematician. But half of it I kind of understood. We don't need to use this as a final proof. We can use it as a bridge of interpretation. That the Platonic vision of the world as a geometrical and harmonic order continues to challenge modern thinkers to rethink the very unity of physics, of number, of form, and of consciousness. Some people now will say, but hold on a minute, modern science rejected the ether. Einstein disproved it. Isn't just this philosophical mumbo jumbo? It's a fair observation. But the history of ether is more complicated than that. Modern physics rejected the mechanical ether of the 19th century, which had nothing to do with the ancient Greek ether. But it was ultimately forced to speak again about something philosophically very, very similar. About what? About fields, about the quantum vacuum, about dark energy, about invisible structures that don't appear directly but determine the very behavior of everything. The question of ether didn't die, it just changed languages. To get to the bottom of it, reality looks less and less like a pile of objects and more like a massive web of relations. And this is exactly what the Greeks were saying, that the cosmos was never a simple sum of disconnected things. For the Pythagoreans, mathematics was not just a calculation tool, it was the language of motion, of cosmic order. The question was not how much does this measure? It was what proportion of it makes it participate in the one. Iamblichus sees mathematics as the very field in which the mind learns how to discern the common within multiplicity.
If the potential of every number is in the monad, then the monad would be intelligible number in the strict sense, since it is not yet manifesting anything actual, but everything conceptually together in it. Iamblichus.
Every Pythagorean student had to go through a period of total silence. And this was not just a random exercise, it was to prepare you. It was the very precondition of listening. Of listening to what? Of listening to the subtle. To listen to the subtle, you must first silence the noise of your own disharmony, so to speak. While I was preparing this video and I was doing my research and I was gathering all the bits and pieces that I wanted to introduce, I found, I think it was the Etymological Magnum, I found two amazing words. Εθερολόγος and εθεροnomao. Εθερολόγος is one who speaks of ether, an expert of ether, one who moves and thinks within the etheric field. The ethερολόγος, the etherologist, is not someone who talks about the sky. They are the one who has begun to understand the language of the fine. He's no longer imprisoned only in the heavy, the immediate, and the sensory. The εθεροnomon, εθεροnomao, is the verb of becoming a mind that has learned how to move inside this thinness without violating it. If the mind is not pure, it only sees objects. If the mind is refined, it stops seeing only objects. It begins to understand relations. And if it refines further, it begins to see that consciousness itself is not foreign to the field of reality. There is no absolute separation between I and the world. There's a common ocean of being that we all swim in, and consciousness is a wave of it. Soul as a motion, a different kind of immortality. Modern physics doesn't actually directly prove the immortality of the soul. It doesn't talk about the immortality of the soul like Plato did. What it can support is something deeper and philosophically stronger. That form dissolves, but energy and information don't simply vanish into nothingness. There is the no hiding theory in quantum theory that says that when the quantum information seems to disappear from a system, it moves to the environment, it doesn't vanish. If the soul is an informational formal order rather than simply a biological product, then death is not annihilation, it is a transition of form. And this is where ether enters the building, because what we talk about a subtle field of coherence, where form, motion, memory, and information can be understood as something that transcends the visible body. Body is the temporary form. Soul is organized information, and a soul has an inner motion, a formal order. And then ether is the field in which information is not annihilated but transformed. In the Phaedrus, Plato says, «Ψυχή πάσα αθάνατος, το γάρ αυτοκίνητον αθάνατον». Every soul is immortal, for what moves itself is immortal. What he says here, he says that a soul is a self-moving principle. Whatever has the source of its motion within itself does not depend on external causes the way composite bodies do. In Plato's Timaeus, the highest motion is circular. The circle returns to itself. It isn't wandering, it is completing. The motions of the stars becomes the model of the mind. To philosophize means to realign the motions of the soul within circular motion. So, παιδεία, education, does not mean to put in more knowledge to gather information. It means to heal the motions of the soul. That's what Greek education used to be. Virtue is not some kind of rule. It's not a moral rule. It's not moralism. Virtue, it is correct motion. Our passions are not a moral problem. They are a misalignment of motion. And lies and falsehood is distorted motion. Hubris is hypertrophic motion, and forgetting, lethe, is inert motion. Body, trajectory. Soul, motion. Mind, circular order. Ether, field of continuity. Immortality, non-destructive self-motion. There is motion with a small m, and there is motion with a capital M. And if a soul doesn't understand any of these things, is it really moving? Yes, but not necessarily self-consciously. We have a mechanical motion here. We have desires, fears, habit, reactions, imitation, social programming. It moves, but it is more like being pushed. It is what Gurdjieff called the mechanical man. It moves, but it does not originate its own motion. And then there is this self-conscious initiated motion when the soul doesn't drift anymore, but it starts recalibrating itself. It begins to see its own motion. Plato called this anamnesis, and Gurdjieff called it awakening and the inner work. And this is the reason why Socrates was out on the streets telling everyone off. Because the real question is not, does it move? Yes, it moves. But is its motion its own? Something else. A soul that understands none of this philosophically may still move more deeply than an intellectual. Because understanding is not only conceptual, there is psychic knowing. There is eros toward truth without theory. For example, a grandmother who lives with truth, with measure, with justice, may move way more harmoniously than an intellectual with 3,000 diplomas and a full ego. Wisdom is not information. Wisdom is a form of motion. We have souls that sleep but move, and there are souls that remember they are themselves motion. The soul as work and not as something given. And here comes something that unsettles me every time I think about it. We usually say that I have a soul, so I am safe, I have a soul. But what if this is wrong? What if the soul is not something you have, but something you need to build? We have a story from Plato in the Phaedrus about the Charioteer. Imagine your soul as a chariot. So the Charioteer is the mind, the one that needs to control the path. And then we have the white horse, which is the spirited element in its noblest form. This is what drives you toward beauty, honor, courage, etc., and to base reason without needing a whip. And then we have the black horse, which is the appetitive part. And this is unruly, heavy, getting distracted, looking here and there, wanting things, etc. Now, initiation is not knowledge. That's what he is trying to say here. Initiation is the work you need to do to make your soul capable of moving upward. Gurdjieff says it in a different way, that man is born as a sleeping machine. If he dies that way, there's nothing left to survive because there was nothing there in the first place. There was no coherent I. So in this reading, this is something that needs to be earned. This is the crystallization of an inner center that is strong enough not to dissolve when the physical body returns to its elements, and it is the way to start building this Dodecahedron inside yourself. So the soul may not be given. The soul might be a work of art. Can the soul be lost? Now we enter a dangerous territory. In the Timaeus, in the myth of Phaedrus, what it is implied is that the soul can lose its correct arrangement, not to be annihilated, but dissolve as order. We are talking about ontological decomposition here, not elimination, dissolution of form. Now, if the soul is organized motion, then the immortality of the soul doesn't mean, wow, super, we can do whatever we want, we will be fine. No. It means that the motion continues, but can continue as harmony or as disintegration. You become what you repeat. This is why Aristotle says, exis deftera physis. What you become what you repeat. Hesiod gives us the ages of man in his Works and Days. We have the gold race, the silver race, the bronze age of man, the heroic one, and the iron one. We can read it as historical eras, but we can also read them as degrees of density of consciousness. The more inner order falls, the heavier the soul becomes, and then it turns into iron. And iron is the only metal that can rust. Then perhaps hell is not a place, it is detuned motion. And what is salvation? Restoration of order. Virtue is no moralism, is the correct geometry of the soul. And the vice, bad geometry, disharmony, not as sin, as guilt, but deformation. And then the greatest question comes. Not will I live after death, but in what geometry of soul am I living right now? Am I in a cube? Am I a tetrahedron? Am I just noise without any center? So maybe this is why true immortality of the soul is not simply to continue existing, but for your inner form not to dissolve. Now, might happen in many lifetimes. I don't know if you believe in incarnation or whatever. We're just opening our mind here, yeah? This may be what the Greeks meant by athanasia, immortality, not endless duration, but an order that cannot be dissolved anymore. And this is what kind of became in Orthodox Christianity later on the term of theosis. It's a similar term that was carried in the Christian Orthodox Church and not in the Catholic Church. The personal demon. Remember Diotima from the Eros episode. Eros is a great demon, neither god nor human, an intermediary, a carrier, a bridge. And if Eros is a demon, which is the force that connects the mortal and the divine, then Socrates' demon may not be an external voice that he was listening, but a higher level of inner organization. Socrates was saying that his demon that did not tell him what to do, only what to avoid. So it seems more like an inner criterion. Not information, not some kind of voice that he was listening to. It is something like a deeper coordinating principle. So perhaps the demon is the form the soul takes when it builds up enough coherence to function as an inner guide. And then we have Heraclitus telling us that ethos, Anthropo demon. Character is fate. A person's character is their demon. Not has a demon, is your demon. Your character, your inner arrangement is your destiny. Your very geometry is your fate. So the soul begins as possibility. With Eros, it moves. With Logos, it starts organizing itself. With self-knowledge, it starts acquiring a center. And then, when it acquires a center, that's maybe what the Greeks called a demon. Anamnesis, recollection, memory. We usually say memory and we mean storage. But Platonic anamnesis is not a recollection in the simple sense. It is a recalling of what is true. The retrieval of the being's forgotten knowledge. In Menon and Phaedon of Plato, the soul does not just learn, it remembers. If that is true, then initiation doesn't give you something new. What it does is to remove forgetting. And this changes everything because there's no truth that is added, it is revealed. And the very word for truth in Greek is alethia. Alethia, alpha negating, and lethi, unforgetting, unconcealment, the lifting of the veil. Then what was Eros from the very beginning? Eros makes you feel that you are lacking something, perhaps because you actually unconsciously remember something more complete. Desire becomes memory. Eros is a recollection of the whole. The Eleusinian mysteries implied exactly this, that the initiate doesn't get saved, they remember. This is why the mystics left with a totally different relationship to death, not because they received a doctrine, but because they saw. And the word for it was epoptia. So we began this video with ether as a cosmic field. We are closing it with anamnesis as inner ether. It is a full circle, very Platonic. It is the circular motion of the mind. The Orphic hymns, the ritual language of the field. Orphic hymn to ether. The Orphic hymns are not just poems, the Orphic hymns are sonic tools for connection. Language that does not aim only at information, but at participation. So the hymn of ether is by itself a small metaphysics.
Ο διός υψημέλαθρον έχων κράτος εέν ατηρές. O you who hold the high-vaulted power of Zeus, forever indestructible. Υψημέλαθρον, ύψη, which means high, plus melathron, which is roof or vault. So the one whose ceiling is the sky itself. Atires, alpha, without, plus tiro, which means to wear down, unworn, unbroken, the one that cannot be exhausted. Astron ηλίου τεσσελινέis τεμέρισμα, portion of the stars, of the sun, and of the moon. The word merisma comes from mirome, which is to receive one's share. Ether is not above the stars, he's inside them. The common share they all hold. It is the Pythagorean kinon, the Pythagorean common made visible in the sky, the common between all motion, all numbers. Πανδαμάτωρ, πυρύπνου, πάση ζωήσιν έναυσμα. All taming, fire-breathing spark of ignition for all living beings. Πανδαμάτωρ, pan, which means all, plus dhamao, which means to tame, to master. So to organize, the organizer of all things is Pandamator. Pyripnus, pyr, which is fire, plus pneo, which is to breathe. So the one who breathes fire, to animate, to give life. Enavsma, from enavo, which is to kindle, the spark, the ignition spark, what modern biophysics calls biophotons. It is this light emission of DNA that coordinates all the cellular function, the invisible flame that keeps all of our cells alive. Υψηφανής αιθήρ κόσμου στοιχείων άριστον. High shining ether, finest element of the cosmos. Υψηφανής, ύψη plus pheno or phaos. Pheno is from phaos, which means light. So it is the one who shines from above. Στοιχείων άριστον is not the most powerful element, but the most perfect. The one element that governs all the others. So it is exactly what Plato is saying also in the Timaeus, that the fifth solid, the Dodecahedron, was used to embroider the universe. Αγλαών ω βλάστημα, σελασφόρων αστεροφεγγές, O radiant offspring, light-bearing star gleaming. Αγλαός is bright, splendid, luminous. Selasforos, selas is brilliance, flame of fire, and phero is to carry, the light bearer. Asterophegis, astir, which is the star, plus phego, which is to shine, illuminated by stars, star gleaming. Κυκλίσκον λύτομαι σε κεκραμένον εύδιον είναι. Calling upon you, I entreat you, be serene in your mingling with me. Κεκραμένον, from keranimi, which means to mix, to blend, to unite. In your mixing with me, in your union with me. Evdios, it's F, which means well, plus Dios, which is from Dias, Zeus, Zeus, divine, bright. So clear and calm.
So the mystic asks for what? He's not asking for wealth, he's not asking for power, he's not asking for triumph. They ask to be synchronized without friction, to participate without inner noise, to be able to receive the subtle without distorting it with one's own turbulence. So that's already an initiation. In this series, in the previous episodes, we spoke of chaos, of Nyx, of Eros, the beginning of cosmic motion. And we arrived here now at something much higher, thinner, the state where the mind, instead of just reacting spasmodically to stimuli, begins to see the common current. The wonder we talked about, the thavma, is the first strike. It is the beginning of awakening. It is the shock of seeing. But the final destination is not to remain forever in this amazement, is to reach a clarity so deep that the mind ceases to be disturbed by the true. And this is athaumasia, not as indifference, but as a stabilization in truth. Then the mind becomes ether-like, clear, calm, incorruptible, receptive to motion without dissolving it. See how far we went in this video. See how much ground we have covered. We started from a simple question, what is ether? What is the fifth element? And then we opened a door that doesn't close easily. We saw that ether is not just one box beside the other four, it is the very field inside which all the boxes acquire their place. Then we saw its etymology, that it is a definition, that aethein is eternal motion that holds form in order. Then we saw that every ism is a solid that forgot its place in the whole, and that Ygea is not just a wish, it is the very encoding of the harmony of all the elements together. And Spyridis proved it mathematically. We saw that for Plato, the soul is not something abstract, but it is self-motion. That information and motion don't disappear, and that immortality is not an extension of time, that the demon might not be a guide, but might be the most complete form that a soul can attain. And all of this culminates in one simple but very formidable proposition. Know thyself doesn't mean find out who you are. It means remember what you never stopped being. Because ultimately, ether is not described, it is participated in. You don't reach it with any definition, you reach it with tuning yourself to it. You don't prove it, you become it. And then the image of the hymn gives us exactly this. Κεκραμένον έβδιον.
What we said before, from keranimi, to mix, to blend, mixing with the universe in the right proportion.
The mystic doesn't ask for power over ether, they ask to become capable of not distorting the motion of ether, but to harmonize themselves with this motion. So we all are inside this field that never ceases to move, it always changes, it brings forms, it unites the many to the one and the one to the many without equalizing nothing. And yet we are on this planet and we keep fighting with each other. Interesting, huh? That's why. Because we are all in different shapes of Platonic solids that cannot understand what they are and they can never communicate. So, what's the problem here? The problem is that we need to become etherologists. We need to start being able to speak the language of ether, i.e. they. Always moves, always flows in a circle, always calling you to become worthy of its clarity. So now that we mapped all of this, we need to do something paradoxical, not to go and look higher, there's no higher, we need to turn downward. And downward, there's the Platonic cave. And inside it, we have people in chains, people that are watching shadows and calling them reality. And inside there, in the cave, is where the cube becomes dogma, water becomes a brainwashed crowd, fire becomes a tyrant, and air becomes sophistry. And the exit from the cave is not just cognitive, it is the turning of the soul. It is the etherization of consciousness. It is the moment when the mind ceases to live only inside the shadow of forms and can finally start seeing the light itself. The day is not simply the end of the night. It is the revelation of what was always there. So the next and last episode of this series is Imera, the revelation.